Hello and welcome to Books, Cats, and Chaos. I'm Casey,
And I am James.
and we are a husband and wife team. And today we will be discussing chapters 1 through 6 of Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Throne of Glass series. And this is James's first time reading the series, so we will not be discussing any spoilers from the rest of the books in the series. There will not be any spoilers or crossover discussions from ACOTAR or Crescent City series. So if you haven't read those books and you're planning to, don't worry, this is a spoiler-free zone.
We're going to try anyway.
I'm trying my hardest to keep all spoilers away from James. I don't want to spoil anything for him through the Throne of Glass adventure, so yeah.
Not including all the Instagram and TikTok memes that get sent my way going, you'll get this later. You'll get it later.
To be fair, I have folders that I have saved to show you, like, once you get through certain books, just so you can enjoy those TikToks and Instagram memes with me.
Yep.
I would like to say I would like to make a correction. I think on our intro episode, I said that there were 7 books in the Throne of Glass series. There are actually 8. I miscounted the books behind me because I'm missing some off the shelf. So
Is
the
that
series,
is that 8 because of the novella or
yes.
oh, okay.
Yeah. So it is 8 total.
8 total. Okay, got it. Okay, great. And just we want to do a content reminder. This podcast is generally going to be for mature audiences just because, we're adults and sometimes if we get too excitable, we might use not kid friendly language. As a general rule, probably not a whole lot of it just because, but just putting that out there so that you know that there's an expectation that it may happen.
So beware those little listening ears. You might want to save this for later. All right. Are you ready?
Yeah, I think I'm ready.
All right. So let's jump in. We are going to review all 6 chapters before we dive into each one specifically. So, Celaena Sardothien, once Aderlin's most feared assassin, has been imprisoned in the brutal salt mines of Endovier for over a year. Her life takes a turn when Captain Kale Westfall arrives with a mysterious offer, an opportunity to win her freedom. But first, she must compete in a deadly contest to become the king's champion. Celaena is brought to meet Crown Prince Dorian, who reveals the competition. Assassins, warriors, and thieves will battle for the title, and the winner will serve the king for several years before gaining freedom. Over the next few chapters, Celaena prepares for this new chapter in her life, traveling with Dorian and Kaol to the glass castle of Rifthold. As they journey, Celaena's sharp wit and unrelenting spirit begin to show, hinting at the fierce competition that lies ahead.
The first 6 chapters, they're actually pretty good. They do. They set a good tone for the story.
I'm glad you think so. I thought so too. I know some people think it's a little slower paced, but I think it sets up the world and it sets up the competition and it allows you to get to know the characters.
Without giving away any spoilers, because
Yeah.
I'm currently on Heir of Fire,
Mhm.
but I feel like that book is slower than the first one. Yeah, yeah. I don't want to say anything without because we're not in that, but just book one, what is to me very evenly paced, and I liked the introductions, and I liked the characters, and I liked the interactions, and I liked how the story unfolded and how you like discovered things and then some of the mysteries and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Um, because I wasn't sure I was even going to like it when I first started reading it,
Mhm.
but it did. It really did grab me. So yeah, that was good. That was just my side thought. Like,
Okay. Well, no, that's good. That's good. All right. So with that, we are going to dive into chapter 1 a little bit, and we're going to have a couple discussion points, Q&A sort of thing. So chapter 1, Celaena Sardothien, she is our female main character, our FMC, um, was once the notorious assassin in Ederland. and she spent a year as a slave in the salt mines of Endovier. She's being escorted by a mysterious hooded man, Captain Kale Westfall, and a group of heavily armed guards through the fortress like interior of Endovier. Despite the guards' efforts to disorient her, Celaena remains sharp and aware, using her assassin's training to note possible escape routes. Though malnourished and worn from her time in the mines, she still exhibits a fierce spirit and calculated confidence. As they approach their destination, Celaena wonders what awaits her and begins to suspect she might finally face her execution.
Mhm.
That's a lot for chapter 1, and I feel like
Yeah, it
her
was
chapters are
actually.
pretty. Yeah, and I feel like her chapters are pretty short chapters. They're not really long, like 20, 30-page chapters like some fantasy novels are. These are pretty short chapters, but I feel like each chapter is jam-packed with stuff. So yeah, so to me, that was like a lot in the first chapter, and it really kind of set you up like, oh my gosh, what is happening? What's going on? Like, what is going to happen to this FMC?
Yeah, it's obviously when you're a reader and you're reading these books and they set them up, you know who the characters are pretty quickly. You figure out who usually is a main character, right? Obviously, we know that she is the main character because it's clearly the book is built around her. So in chapter 1 she's not going to get executed. Like, as the reader, you know that,
Yeah.
right? So it trying to get yourself into the mindset of her point of view, the character's point of view, because even though girl, you're gonna be fine ish,
Mhm.
she doesn't know she's gonna be fine ish, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I felt that it was a good portrayal of the character to show that even though she was this very strong, very proud, very resilient, assassin, she still is like, oh shit, is it time now? Like, you know,
Mhm.
am I meeting my end? Because I am an assassin who has killed a lot of people. And, you know,
Right.
to her, it's a very logical end, kind of. Like, why did they not do it right away? Obviously, she worked in the mines for, a year. So she
Yeah.
probably was questioning that a bit. Like, why didn't they just kill me right away versus slave
Mhm.
labor? But I felt she did a good job of portraying Selena's, what do I want to say, her unknowing, of what was going to happen,
Mm.
her unease, and her kind of the character Selena would never admit it, but her fear of the future,
Yeah.
because she's a character who doesn't like to show fear.
Yes. And with that, I mean, how does Selena's internal mantra, "I will not be afraid," reflect her survival strategy and even her mental fortitude? You know, how might this shape her choices going forward? She's clearly afraid, but she is trying not to show it. She doesn't know what's happening. She was, taken from the mines, bag thrown over her head. Guards are trying to disorient her, but she's repeating this mantra, "I will not be afraid." So, yeah, like, how do you think that all.
Yeah, it's uh, I like to try and figure out the character, how it is that they think about things, right? And
Mhm,
so she has this, like you said, this mantra of "I will not be afraid." And I kind of think about it like she's conditioned herself to, one, to not show that she's afraid,
mhm,
and two, to kind of not admit to herself that she's afraid,
mhm,
even if she is, which
mhm.
we actually kind of get a little glimpse of that, as the chapter goes on. Because if you think about it, who's going to be afraid of an assassin that shows that she's afraid
Yeah.
of anything? You know, like,
Mhm,
she's not afraid to kill people. She's an assassin, right? But she, as an assassin, has to be willing to go into situations where she knows that she may die, and she
mhm.
can't show any kind of fear like that. And so you can't do that and admit to yourself that you have a fear of
Yeah.
literally anything. So
Yeah.
so it's a conditioning that she tells herself, "I will not be afraid." But it
Mhm.
also shows that she's not yet gotten to the point where she's so callous that it's like she has to remind herself. Like, you know what I mean? Some characters go through and you just look at them and you're like, "Oh, yeah, he's not afraid of anything. He doesn't show emotion, period."
Yeah.
She has to still kind of actively remind herself, like, "I'm not gonna show fear. I'm not gonna be afraid." And
Mhm.
and she can talk herself into that, but she still has to work at it.
Yeah. I think too, just having been a slave for a year or two, that's gonna affect just, your way of thinking and the way you're going to view and see the world because it is a traumatic thing. You had the freedom, you were an assassin, you can go anywhere, do anything, you are free, and now suddenly you are bound and chained day and night.
Mhm.
And that, is just like I couldn't even imagine. Like, oh,
I mean, it
uh
didn't stop her from acting out and creating problems.
that is true. So I mean, even like despite her being shackled and everything, Selena is constantly finding ways to rebel. Like she's silently mocking this Captain Kale Westfall despite his intimidation attempts. So, I mean, to me, this shows that despite being a slave and despite them trying to break her spirit and everything for a year, she refuses to be broken. It, she refuses to give up. She is still strong. She is still fighting.
Mhm.
Uh, but speaking of Kale Westfall, what are your kind of first impressions of him?
I mean, so when they first introduced him, I mean, initially my thought was, "Oh, okay, so this is another main character." He's kind of a dick, like, because that's the way he's acting, right? And at the same time, I'm sitting there going, "Well, he's a soldier." I mean, we know he's a soldier before we know he's a soldier, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and we know before she knows any of that. But the way he treats her, very callous, very, but then, from his perspective, you think, well, he has to because she is a renowned assassin
Mhm.
that would probably gut all of them given, the slightest minute, you know,
Yeah.
30 seconds. And he knows that. And he knows the story, right, of her.
Mhm.
He knows her reputation,
Mhm.
but he is surprised how small she is and how young she is, right? Because
Yeah.
the the reputation far precedes the person. And so I remember him being a little surprised by that, like, okay, but don't let your guard down because she is still an assassin. So
Mhm.
he's smart to keep her, you know, by not engaging with her. um it's a way to keep her, at bay because you don't let your guard down, kind of thing. So so in the beginning, like I said, he comes off as a dick, but he also off as a very capable. Before we even know that he's like, how high he is in the chain, you're like, oh, this is a soldier who knows the game. He's smart, he's capable, he's not going to make a stupid mistake and be like, yeah, you can walk next to me. Like, that's not him.
Yeah. He knows his job. He knows what he has to do and securing a prisoner and everything.
Yeah, I do warm up to his character fairly quickly, though. No, I do. I like his character. I know I'm
Um,
setting myself up for a bunch of like people who disagree with
but
that.
that's the extent of your knowledge, which everybody makes their own judgment about each of the characters throughout this series. All right. Chapter 2. You want to bring us into chapter 2?
Chapter 2. So Celaena is brought before Crown Prince Dorian. I don't even know how to say half these words. Havillard?
Havliard, I
Havliard?
believe. I believe that's the
Uh,
pronunciation in the audiobooks.
oh, okay. In a grand and opulent throne room, a stark contrast to the desolation of Endovier. Despite her filthy appearance and shackles, Celaena's pride and defiance remain intact, refusing to bow before the prince. When the Duke of Parrington assaults her for not bowing, Dorian steps in, casually dismissing the Duke's cruelty. The interaction establishes an interesting power dynamic between the two men. As Celaena regains her composure, Dorian acknowledges her infamous reputation, setting the stage for a pivotal proposition. The tone shifts as Celaena realizes she's not here to be executed, which we knew, but is instead being offered a choice, which we did not know. Um, and so we've already kind of seen this with her interaction with Kale, but
Mhm.
now we have her being defiant to Dorian as well,
Mm.
which is pretty ballsy considering that, he's the prince, you know. I mean, at this point, well, I think at this point she's still not completely convinced that she's not being executed. Like,
No, yeah, she doesn't know yet. I think her refusal to bow to the crown prince was that if these were her last moments alive, she refused to bow before anybody.
right.
So,
Yeah. She's going out on her terms.
yes,
Like,
exactly.
screw the establishment, screw you.
Yes. So yeah, she doesn't know what's going on yet. She just knows that suddenly she's in this throne room, she's in front of the prince. She refuses to bow, and we have a new character enter the scene, Duke Parrington, who grabs her and throws her to the floor and says, "This is how you greet the prince." And I don't know, just that interaction already tells me what kind of person Duke Parrington is.
Yeah.
He's a bully.
Did they ever describe how he looks?
They did, and
Because I have a very certain visage of him in my mind that I think is different than the way that you look at him or the way that you envision him,
mm,
um,
see,
based on the way he acts.
okay. I s have always he's not described this way, but I always pictured him as Duke Weselton from Frozen. There's something there, but I would have to open up my book, but I do remember that his eyes are described as obsidian, and eyes are not typically described as being obsidian. Dark brown, hazel, green, blue. But yeah, you'll get like a really dark brown, almost black, but you never get eyes that are obsidian. So to me, that was noteworthy. And
That's uh, I his character to me, the way that I always think about him, I always think
Mhm.
about him as this much like larger character that like
Okay.
kind of like like big, overweight, kind of the kind of person you look at and they seem like they're maybe like always a little sweaty
Mm.
because of the way that he isn't afraid to grab and just manhandle people. Like, you have to have a certain kind of stature and strength in order to do that.
Yeah.
And then just, I don't know, to me, he just seems like a much bigger, larger bodied person who is not afraid to like throw his weight around, but he's also like not an attractive person. And I can't remember if they describe him like that in the book or not, but that is how I, in my brain, like whenever that character comes up, I'm like, oh, it's the like you wouldn't want to get into a fight with him because he could
Mhm.
probably take you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. So I found it. So I'll read part of the passage. So thundering steps issued from behind her, and someone grabbed her by the neck. Selena only glimpsed crimson cheeks and a sandy mustache before being thrown to the icy marble floor. That is a proper way to greet your future king, a red faced man snapped at Selena. The assassin hissed, baring her teeth as she twisted her head to look at the kneeling bastard. He was almost as large as her overseer, clothed in reds and oranges that matched his thinning hair. His obsidian eyes glittered as his grip tightened on her neck. So from there, he has a sandy mustache, crimson cheeks. So I'm figuring somebody that's paler in nature who will get flushed easily. He's almost as large as her overseer, and he has thinning hair with black eyes. So not a very attractive sounding man.
No, no, and I just did a little search on Google here to see what sort of some other people
You're looking at
actually.
fan art.
It's actually funny because some of the top pictures that came up were basically of how I envisioned him as a sweaty, kind of red cheeked, red flushed face, not, very attractive, kind of whatever. And I scrolled down
Yeah.
a little bit and somebody had made a Reddit thread and they put the picture of Duke Wesselton.
Thank you. Thank you. I am not the only one.
So no, it's your thought process behind that is valid because he is kind of a wormy who seems to not be a huge concern right away, but then, that quickly changes when you start to get into it. But
Yeah.
he's always one of those side characters, that always has a little bit more sway than you initially realize.
Yeah. So let's see. So how do you think the interaction between Dorian and Duke Parrington and even Selena foreshadows the different kinds of power struggles that will come into play throughout the story?
Well, we know that Dorian doesn't like Parrington. Like,
Mm.
that's pretty evident right off even though he is fairly non-confrontational during this
Mhm.
encounter, but he can't afford to be because this is an assassin and he's the prince. And, there's a lot of politics that are going on in this whole situation from the get go,
Yeah.
right? But it does seem pretty evident that Parrington and Dorian are not friends.
Mhm.
And, you know, the Parrington's behavior is pretty much that's his character, right? I mean, he's going to be like that to Celaena and probably anybody else that he can throw
That
his,
gets in his way.
yeah, he can throw his weight around. I mean, he's used to getting what he wants because he is a dude. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I personally liked that Prince Dorian just shut him up and dismissed him. Like, don't you have like treasury meetings or something that you need to
mhm.
go to? Like, just go, get out of here. You're not wanted here.
Well, yeah, it was a very non-confrontational, polite way for Dorian to say, "I'm tired of looking at you. Like, don't you have somewhere else to be?
Mhm.
F off." Like,
Yeah.
but he can't say that because
Well,
he's the prince. But you could see it. Um,
yeah.
and I mean, really, if you thought about it, Parrington probably didn't have to leave.
He could have thrown his weight around more. I think we don't get that much of an interaction with Parrington at this point, but I think he knows how to pick his battles too, especially with an audience in front of the guards, in front of Kaol, especially in front of Selena, the assassin. Like, I know when to question the prince and when
Yeah.
to, you know.
Well, and if it's not in his best interest, like he's at this particular moment, it's not going to get him anything. Like
Mhm.
he made his point. He showed, if nothing else, he showed her
Mm.
who he was and that she should be afraid of him.
Mhm.
Didn't really work. You know, first thing that she wants to do is kill him for, touching her.
Yeah. Her first immediate thing is how can I wrap these chains around him? Yeah.
Yeah. So, didn't really work into his, but that was his goal was she needs to know who I am
Mhm.
and I'm gonna throw my weight around a little bit.
Mhm.
And okay, yeah, you're right. I got things to do. Okay, later. Like,
Yeah.
you know, he's also he's a real dick, not a perceived dick. Like like we thought. Oh,
Oh, we got a special visitor here. If you are watching us on YouTube, that was our cat Willow making an entrance, sort of. So,
she's right
talking
out
about
of frame. Oh,
so since we were talking about Dorian, what was your first initial reaction to meeting Prince Dorian, and what did you think of, like, his charming demeanor and his willingness, to dismiss other sufferings? Do you think his charm is genuine? Do you think it's part of his, like, royal persona? Like, do you think he laid it on thick and heavy?
well, yeah. When we first meet Dorian, I'm very unsure of what to think of his character because it could go a number of ways. He could be, like you said, he could be genuine. He could be putting on a show. You just at this point you don't know because of the way he's treating her because
Mhm.
he's treating her with kind of a bit of indifference. Like, you know, I got you out of there. You should be singing my eternal, praises for getting you out of there. I'm so good and I'm so great and you're welcome. And, she ain't about that. And at this point, it's too early to really, if you had to make a character judgment call on him
Mhm.
at this exact moment,
Mhm.
I personally would be leaning towards, I don't know. I don't think he's it. Like, you know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah.
and I mean, it does, you still kind of have that feeling for a while.
Okay.
Oh, I did anyway, for at least the first number of chapters. It was, he's the prince. Like he's used to laying it on to get what he wants and
Yeah.
to make people think. I mean, that's the job of a prince is to make people that you talk to think they are the most important thing right at that moment.
Yeah.
Prince or any real politic, whatever, they're shaking your hand and they're already looking at the person behind you because they
Mhm.
are doing, planning,
Yeah.
doing my thing here, and then I got to do my thing over here. And at this point, she's a slave, assassin, prisoner. What could he possibly want with her?
We don't know yet.
We don't know what he wants with her other than he wants her to be thankful. And she's kind of like, why?
Yeah. I do not know how many ways I am planning on killing you if I better make this worth my while. I have in my notes here, is Kale a bitch? Dorian questions Kale as to why Celaena wasn't washed before their meeting, because Kale did literally drag her out of the mines, dirty and, you know, everything. And Kale didn't want to keep the prince waiting. Do you think this was like a power play on Kale's part? Not a power play against the prince, but like a power play against Celaena, or do you think it is a power play
No,
against the prince?
I definitely think that he was doing that to keep her as uncomfortable as possible. Because again, without knowing the full range or really any range of her skills, they'd
Mhm.
only heard about them. They hadn't seen them other than, the stuff that she did while she was in the mines, like, killing the couple of the guards and generally being a pain overall while she's in her servitude.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I think Kale was definitely just trying to be a pain in the ass to her. And
Okay.
I think he didn't really care what Dorian thought.
Hmm.
And basically, it turned out the way like, oh, Dorian says, you couldn't at least wash her. And it's
Eh,
really easy for somebody like Kale to sit there and go, well, you wanted her right away. So
here
this
she is.
this is your fault. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's a way to
Yeah.
say this is your fault without saying this is your fault. It was I was trying to do my job as
Mm.
quick as possible.
Yeah.
He could have, but also that would have been a chance for her to try and escape. Or,
That's true.
I mean, so logistically speaking, from a soldier point of view, he also
Mhm.
may have been looking at it like, yeah, I'm not going to make her life any easier.
Mhm.
And also, like, I ain't risking nothing. Those chains ain't coming off for nothing.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that is true. Um, into that, we do get a mention in this chapter of Selena being trained as an assassin since she was 8 years old, which is, quite a young age. We learned that she was found by the king of assassins when she was 8. So she's had a lifetime of training. We learned that when she was 17, she was caught and sentenced to Endovier. And during her times in the mine, in her desperation to die, Selena does snap and she killed the overseer. And 23 centuries before she was like just a fingertip away from the wall, she was so close to escaping. And any other prisoner before that, whenever they attempted to flee, they never got that far. They only made it a couple of feet before they were killed immediately. And the king ordered for her to be kept alive for as long as possible in these mines. Anybody else, if they try to escape, they're dead. With her, he wanted her to be kept alive. And his reasoning is he wanted her to endure the misery of Endovier. So, do you think, again, another power play from the king? Is this just the king's pride because Aderland's assassin was just a young girl at 17? Or, like, he could have killed her. He could have just sentenced her to death right away and been done with Aderland's assassin. But instead, he was like, no, take her to the mines. If she tries to escape, if she tries anything, keep her alive. Like, beat her, do whatever, but she needs to be kept alive. Like,
It's hard because, now being farther along in the series, I have a more understanding of the bigger plan, so at this point, it's hard to know what the king is thinking. And I would say, he really is doing a power play because I think he's trying to break her because she is an assassin and a very good one at that, like
yeah.
one of the best. So I think that it definitely, the king looked at her, or at least looked at her reputation, right?
Mhm.
And was
Yeah.
like, if I can ever get my hands on her, I need to knock her down because she's going to be, hell on wheels, but I can use her.
Hmm.
He's a king, and we already know at this point that he's conquered a lot of other stuff. So he's
Yeah.
always going to be thinking about military, strategic pawns, people that he can, wrangle into his service through
Mhm.
something, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
threats of family or gold or freedom, you know, he's a king and he's a warrior king, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
So I think he really was trying to break her and it didn't work, but if nothing else, it did get her out of commission.
Mm.
Because even though she did kill her sentry overseer and the other sentries, right?
Mm.
Um, to me, the guards and people that are in charge of things like the mines and stuff,
Yeah.
they're not the ones that you put into the important things. Like, they're
Mm.
typically not your best fighters, your smartest soldiers, you know what I mean?
That's
They're
true.
not the Kales of the kingdom. They're the guys who didn't quite cut it,
Mhm.
um, but you still have a purpose for them.
Yeah.
Because it's not hard to guard a bunch of people who are sick and starving and tired all the time, which
True.
and that's not to take anything away from her and her ability to kill 27 of them or
23
33 of them,
plus 1.
you know? Like, that's still a feat in itself that she
Yeah.
was able to do that after being starved and working to the bone, and you know what I mean?
And whip and everything. Yeah.
Um, but if those guards had been other guards, I don't think she would have had quite as much luck getting as many of them.
Okay.
So, just yeah. I don't know. That was a tangent. I don't even remember what the original point was, but
All right. Well, I think we're ready to move on to chapter 3. Um, so Dorian reveals the reason for Celaena's presence. The king of Adarlan seeks a champion to serve as his personal assassin. Dorian proposes that Celaena enters a competition to prove herself among other assassins, warriors, and criminals. If she wins, she'll serve as the king's champion for a few years and then be granted her freedom. Celaena, although initially amused by the idea, recognizes the opportunity as her best chance at freedom. The conversation is a turning point as Celaena begins to weigh her options: stay in the mines and die, or compete in the deadly contest and perhaps regain her life. I find this funny because, like, when she first learns that she can become the king's champion, like, her immediate reaction is laughter. And she's already like, I'm already Adarlan's assassin. I am Adarlan's greatest assassin. Why do I need to enter this competition? Like, just name me the champion. Let's get this done and over with? So I love her spunk and I love what's the her high opinion of herself. Like, even though she's been in the mines and she's been a slave for over a year, she's just like, bitch, please. I'm
yeah.
still the top shit. What is this competition even about?
Kind of makes you wonder too if they were thinking that she might not actually make it to the end, or if
Mm,
they were hoping she wouldn't make it to the end,
mm,
or I mean, we don't know. Like, what was the actual outcome that they wanted,
mm.
that they're hoping for? Obviously, they know that she's very strong and she's an assassin and she can do a lot of damage, but even as an assassin, she's typically going after people who could never fight off an assassin, right?
Yeah.
Politics, dukes, people who, people like that, people who are not going to fight back against her. They're going to
Not
cry.
easily. Yeah, and barter and
Yeah, they're going to beg for their lives and try to figure a way out of it, right?
yeah.
And I think that's something that she hasn't considered, is that she will be going up against, like, she's very full of herself. She's like, I'm number one, baby. Like, and she doesn't think about the fact that there are literally people who are warrior class, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
assassins are a particular type of fighter. Typically, they rely on surprise and stealth,
Still,
and
sneak attack.
assassins very rarely are going to win a fight going front to face with a warrior class type.
I love that you're getting very D&D-esque. Warrior
Well,
class.
I mean, but yeah, but if you think about, I mean, people
But
train
yeah.
for specific things,
Yeah.
because they are suited for specific things. People who are big,
Mhm.
typically they're like, I'm not gonna sneak around. What are they gonna do? Like, I'm just gonna backhand them into the wall, and then that guy, I'm gonna kick his face down into his throat. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's two different mindsets, and I don't think at this point she's even considered that. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? It's not until later when she meets some of the other champions, which, when we get there, but then it's then she's gonna have her own little, like, ooh moment.
Yeah.
But right now she is, because in terms of what she knows and what she's done and whatever, she is the best.
Mhm.
And those are valid feelings because, I mean, she is. Like,
Yeah.
she has survived all manner of thing, and she really only got caught because of a stupid mistake.
Which we don't know yet at this point.
Right. But, you know, she's gonna have to learn to tone it down a little bit because
Well, see, I think it worked for her because with her sassiness and her confidence in herself, the Prince Dorian came to her and he was like, "You be the king's champion for 6 years, you'll earn your freedom." And she's like, "Huh, no." And they negotiated down to 4 years, like, to have the audacity almost to look at the prince and be like, "No, not 6
yeah,
years. It's gonna be less than that, thank you."
yeah, no deal.
Um, like, anybody else would be quaking in their shoes, so to speak, in front of the prince and be like, "Oh my god, yes, thank you so much. 6 years, that's more than I can ever possibly dream of." And she's just like, "No." And,
Yeah,
they got it down to 4 years.
she's almost like at this point where she's almost like, "Is there a bus back to the mines? Because this ain't working for me." Like,
Right? So, and even Dorian seemed kind of, I guess, relaxed in his attitude in offering Celaena this position. So do you think his charm is hiding a deeper motive at this point? Do you think he sees her as a pawn in his father's game, or do you believe that he genuinely believes in her and her abilities? He's
no,
never
at this point, I don't think so. I think at this point he is trying to find the best option that's gonna help him out,
Hmm,
but I don't think that he's convinced in terms of she thinks she's very good,
mhm.
and he says, "Well, she's got a good reputation, but I'm just not seeing it. Like, she's kind of
Small and
she's a brat. Like, she's very much at this point." And it's weird because they treat her like, on one hand, they're treating her like a very dangerous threat, right?
mhm.
Keeping her
Yeah,
chained up and all this. But then on the other hand, they talk to her like, but I don't know if you're the right pick for the like, and it's like, she did kill 23 cards, guys. Like, don't forget this. And then
right.
I feel like Kale never really like lets that go. He's like, Dorian, you're being too like candid about this.
Well, I mean, like, a soldier is always going to back another soldier, sort of thing, like, even if they worked at the mines or as palace guards or whatever, like, they're still one and the same, so that's almost like a direct attack on him, I would think. But I think too, like, with Dorian bantering with Selena during all of this is a way for him to test her mental fortitude
Mhm.
and everything too, because she has been in the mines for a year, and the mines usually break people. And they say, too, that the mines usually kill people within a couple of months due to lack of food
Yeah,
and my mind just went
infection.
blank.
Yeah, infections from
Infections and
the
everything.
yeah.
And she has somehow stayed alive for a year. So maybe physically she's okay, but mentally, like, is she off her rocker? Like, could she come away from the mines and participate in this, or would they be releasing a mad woman into the palace,
True. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that Dorian employs, not just on her, but on everybody. We see him do it to Kale too,
Mhm.
on different occasions where they have these like I'm trying to think of the term, but it's like when you're saying something without saying it, you know what I mean?
Mm,
Like it's the undertone of what you're
mhm.
saying. So you come and you're like, "Oh, did you see, like, did they perform well?" And you're really asking them like, "Do you think that they're gonna advance to whatever," right?
Yeah.
Dorian uses his wit and banter sort of as a weapon, figure out where people are they smart enough to keep up with him because
Mhm.
he is very smart. And like you said, it's a way for him to see how mentally there she still is, which he realizes pretty quickly that, yeah, she's quick.
Yeah.
She's a pain in the ass, but in terms of like she is definitely a force to be watched because that time in the mines literally didn't do anything to her other than make her really skinny. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
she was not broken, and I think he was glad for that though. Like, because you kind of have to really wonder how serious all these people feel about this. Like, is she a viable? Does she stand a chance? Is this just for funny games? Like, pull her out after a year and then throw her into a tournament and watch her get killed by the first guy she goes up against? Because then it's, well, I thought she was a great assassin and she died at the first one. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
is this a serious thing? If I was her, I would be like, am I really even getting a fair deal at this point? Like, are they really going to give me my freedom? They really,
Yeah.
I can go all, like, I think I can go all the way, but am I going to get to the
Well,
end and then they're going to be like, okay,
just kidding.
yeah, right? Like,
Back to the mines you go. That was fun. Yeah. Yeah. No, and then is such a shit too because he drops it at the end that Celaena won't be competing as Celaena Sardothien,
mhm.
Aderlin's assassin. She will have to use an alias. No one knew that Celaena, the assassin, was a young woman. The king didn't want word to get out that the famous assassin was a young woman. That, like, to me, that just the king didn't wanna hurt his pride, sort of thing. Nobody had been able to catch the assassin up until that point, and the king is just like, "We can't have it getting out," that this 17-year-old girl is the assassin, and Prince Dorian is also like, "We can't have you as Selena entering this competition." So, do you think it would it hurt the king if the competitors and his advisors knew that the Aderlands assassin is a young woman? Would it put a bigger target on Selena's back if she didn't use the alias?
I think if they had all known that she
Mm,
was the famous assassin, she definitely would have been picked out early on. Like,
mm,
they they would have come after her from the get-go, and maybe not even other competitors or anything like that, but political people who wanted revenge, or I mean, eh, anybody really, family of one of the guards she killed at the mines, who, if they
yeah,
knew that she was in the castle, I mean, that could cause an uprising,
mhm,
with people. Like, why is the king housing the
the assassin.
assassin? Like, does he not care about his subjects? She killed all these soldiers, and now she's getting put up in a fancy room. Like,
Yeah,
so I, that was definitely strategic thinking on the king's part.
on Dorian's part. Dorian is the one that was like, "You have to compete under an alias."
I thought the king didn't want. Oh,
No, it was Dorian. Dorian was like, "So I want you to enter this competition if you want your freedom. By the way, if you agree, you have to enter under an alias."
oh yeah, yeah. Because yeah, I forgot they had to go and present it to the king,
Mhm.
and he was like, "I want her as my champion," and the king was just like, "Okay."
The fuck boy.
Yeah, like, why? But okay. This is kind of interesting. Like, yeah, that's right. I had gotten that 2 mixed up, I forgot. Um, Definitely strategic thinking, yeah. But, well, that's the thing I was saying too, Dorian is a strategic thinker, and he
Mm,
uses that because what he lacks in physical power, not to say that he's necessarily weak,
mhm.
but if it came down to it and there was a fight, I think that Kale could take him. I think he would,
Oh, definitely. I mean,
like,
like, Dorian trains, he would have to, most princes carry a sword and stuff, so they get the basic training, but Kale, as captain of the soldiers,
yeah.
would have to be training daily. He's going to be breaking up skirmishes and everything.
Yeah,
Um,
so Dorian has to use his wit to make up for what he lacks in physical and that he's strategic, planning, so this was a plan, like, and he probably had that plan from way before they even went to get her. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, depending on what she says,
Hmm.
this is going to be the way it goes. If she says no, we're going to have to convince her to say yes. Okay, so moving on now to chapter 4. Now that we have sort of a basis of, what's going on with her and the expectations of those around her. Chapter 4. After agreeing to the deal, Celaena is taken to her temporary quarters in Endovier. She's scrubbed clean, her wounds treated, and she's given proper clothing, marking her physical transformation from slave to competitor. Despite the luxury of a bed, Celaena chooses to sleep on the floor, her time in the mines still haunting her body and mind. She reflects on her physical deterioration over the past year and sets her mind on regaining her strength, beauty, and power. This chapter highlights the first steps in Celaena's journey towards reclaiming her former self. So, you know, there's kind of a lot to unpack there, from
Hmm.
her moving to a basically a kind of a place of comfort after a year of pure hell. Like,
Hmm.
so, this is something that they kind of talk about and allude to up to this point. But, she spent a year in the mines. She physically suffered a lot.
Hmm.
So, what was your kind of, I guess, your reaction, or not your reaction, but your thought process on, you know, the fact that she really does look at herself, because she hasn't thought about herself in a year. But isn't it she like sees herself in a reflection or something somewhere and she's like, oh, like I look bad. Like,
Yeah. So I think she was looking in the mirror, like, at her reflection, and she's just going over how thin she now is. Like, she was always thin, but thin athletic, from being an
mm-hmm,
assassin, being very physical. And yes, she was still doing physical things in the salt mines with the pickaxe and everything, but the malnourishment
mm-hmm.
of not being able to eat real food probably had a severe vitamin D deficiency, when you're in the mines all the time.
Well, didn't she
Um,
even say that she couldn't really even remember the last time she saw a sunrise or a sunset or something? Like,
yeah, like, and the scars, because she was whipped, and she was whipped a lot during her time there. So that has got to be a physical shock. The last time you saw yourself, your reflection, you're a healthy person, and then to see yourself after a year, and this is now what you look like, that's gotta play some mental just blood to yourself. And then she's hungry, and she wants to eat the food, and she does eat the food, like a real dinner. She's finally given a real dinner, and she throws it up.
mm,
And I don't think most people realize that you can't just give a starving person, a person who has been starving for over a year, you can't just give them a big feast. Like, it's detrimental to your body,
oh
which
yeah.
seems really weird to think about that way, but no, you've got to ease your body back into that. So I really like that Sarah did write that in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
No, that was a very realistic approach to a person who was in those kinds of conditions. When your body
mhm,
is malnourished and malnutrition, it kind of learns how to survive on, like, it is slowly killing you. Like, you
yeah,
can't survive malnourished for a long, long time. Things happen. Your fat deposits go away, your stomach shrinks, your body learns to make the most of what it has to a certain degree. And then you throw some, fancy food in there. I mean, she probably was living off of bread, you know,
and gruel, I think.
and
Yeah,
gruel, which gruel is like what, oats and, you know, whatever, right?
bottom of the barrel, like leftover oat stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And suddenly you throw in, even in a case like that, something as simple as eating like an apple can be enough to upset the body because it's got things in it that you haven't had.
Yeah.
Your body has to readjust to having all of that kind of stuff, the juice and the nutrients,
The sugar, vitamins,
and
everything.
even just probably just the sheer amount of food. She
Mhm.
probably was living off of, a bowl that was only, like a tiny, you know,
Thing. Yeah.
and your stomach just can't handle it. Your body doesn't know what to do with all that extra stuff. And yeah, it can't digest it properly. It can't absorb the nutrients. And so, yeah, you're going to get rid of it.
Yeah. And I think as you're saying, everything shrinks. I think being 17 when she, was first thrown into Endovier, she was still developing. It's you don't really think about it, but at 17, you're still developing, you're still growing. She was still physically a girl on the cusp of womanhood, and then to be thrown in and then be malnourished. And yeah, so she spent a little bit of time in front of the mirror mourning the loss of her beauty. Like, her golden hair is not as vibrant and shiny, and her breasts have like all but disappeared. That would be hard for any woman. And that would be hard for anybody that's still in their development years, Like, going into a situation as an adult would suck, like, it would suck no matter what age, but at least as an adult, your frontal lobe and everything has already fully developed, you have the skills to hopefully cope. She's going in, or she went in, is still a developing woman, still, on that cusp, and that's hard. That's hard to take in.
I would
Um
just die. So you just put me in there and I would just be like, dude, bro, I'm 40. No, like, I'm going to go to that corner over there. Don't bother me. I'll be dead
That's
in 30 minutes. Like, just leave me alone. Like,
I think that's every millennial's dream at this point, though, like, "Just let me go in the corner and just leave me alone. I'm done."
yeah, pretty much. But it does for her. It sets up this important journey now of her
Mhm,
realizing, oh, I got work to do because
mhm,
in the state I'm in, I can talk a big game,
yeah,
but I don't probably couldn't do much against, like I said, the guards that she killed in the mines, not the smartest, not the strongest, not the, you know what I mean? Going
yeah,
up against trained fighters at this point, she doesn't stand a chance.
mm,
And I think this is her first step in, even if she doesn't want to admit it, it's her first step in realizing it and acknowledging that she's in trouble because
mm,
she's accepted this, thing. But at this point, can she actually win? Because the girl in the mirror is not the girl that
reflected.
it's not what she feels,
Yeah,
which she will discover, you know, during
yeah,
training. And yeah, it's a big step for the character to see the weakness, not of her own fault, but she's been
mhm,
put into this position and now she has to figure out how quickly can she get out of it,
mhm,
and can she get out of it.
mm,
And that's not even just all of it, then there's a whole psychological part to this because,
yeah,
you take somebody who's in that and you suddenly pull them out. And now all
mhm.
of a sudden she's got a bed and there's food and things that she probably thought she'd never see again.
Nice clothes.
So this is going to be, mental mind screwing. Like, just
Yeah,
this, like, is this real? Did I
mhm,
actually die? And like, I mean, like you
yeah,
kind of question, like, is this a cruel game? Did they just pull me out? And, like, mentally, she's got to be going through just as much as she is physically at this point. Like,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
mean, even like she rejected sleeping in the bed too. Like her body rejected the food. She tossed and turned in the comfy bed. Like she just couldn't right away. Kale the next morning finds her sleeping on the floor with the pillow. And that's just heartbreaking. Like, just get so used to sleeping on something hard and not, that your immediate reaction to comfort is something hard and not something regular like a bed.
Well, yeah, you don't know what to make of it, and your body
Yeah.
is just like, "No, this isn't no, I'm not okay with this." And part of it could too just be her not fully accepting the situation yet too, you know? Like, she's still maybe in denial, disbelief about what's happening, like, don't get too comfortable because you might not be staying here for very long. Like,
Yeah.
you don't know. And who would want to get wrapped up in the comforts of life
And then have it
just to
yanked
have
away.
it pulled away again?
Yeah.
So you got to figure she's a little bit,
Yeah.
mentally, she's just not accepting what it is yet.
Mhm. I like that with Dawn came kind of a new outlook. She's marveling at the sunlight and it's reawakening something in her to life outside the mines. And again, she thinks to herself with this new outlook and this new day, I will not be afraid. Um, I don't know. I really love that phrase.
It feels kind of like a mantra. Like she actively tells herself, I will not be afraid. Partly
Yeah.
because as an assassin, like I was saying earlier, you can't show fear because as an assassin, you are supposed to be an emotionless killing machine, right?
Hmm.
And people aren't going to be afraid of a thing that also looks like it's afraid of what it's doing,
Hmm.
you know? But her repeating that to herself is her affirmation and her mantra. And it's her telling herself, I have things to do. I will not be afraid. I don't have time to be afraid.
Hmm.
If I have time to think about this, I have time to be training or
Yeah.
figuring out how to get out of here. Fear is a luxury she does not have.
Yeah.
That's how it feels to me. Like
Fear
it's
can be dealt with later. Like, let me
yeah,
get through the moment and then I will break down, what I was
yeah. Breakdown
making me
can happen
afraid.
later. Right now, I got crap to do, and that's a future me problem.
Yeah. I think also this chapter brought out her reaching out and wanting and needing that human connection again. Yes, she's shackled with other slaves, during her year at Endovier. And, everybody's kind of broken down. You're not really going to form deep connections in something like that. You're not going to form relationships with your guards, with your overseer and stuff. So, as they are journeying by horseback back to Rifthold, Celaena's finds herself once again shackled with Kale holding her chains. And despite that, despite again having sort of an overseer with Captain Kale, she's goading him with questions. I
Mm,
think she is just, she so desperately wants to talk to someone she needs and is craving this human connection again. And she desperately wants him to ask her about her past as an assassin and how she became so great. Like, do you think this is just her being prideful about her past and about being the greatest assassin? Or do you think this is more like, fuck, please talk to me? Like,
mm, could be. I mean, part of that, with the human connection and everything. But I feel more distinctly this part is more along the lines of she needs him to be afraid of her and
Mm.
he's not.
Mhm. That's a good point.
He's wary of her,
Mhm.
but since the moment that he met her and she couldn't see his face, she got the glimpse of his sword when he was doing something and she was like, "Oh shit, like he's a guard of the, like the inside guard,
Yeah.
that gave her pause, And I think that she is desperately trying to take control of the relationship that they have because they do have a relationship at this point. It's,
Mm.
I'm the person in charge of you, and you are this maybe champion contestant, but you're also an assassin, and you're also a pain in the ass because she's constantly trying to get a rise out of him in
Mhm.
some way, and
Mhm.
he isn't giving it to her. You,
Yeah.
you know, she's like, "Hey, this and hey, that," and he's just like, "Yeah, okay," you know. And she doesn't know how to deal with that,
Yeah.
and I feel like she's trying to take control of the situation because she knows that she's at a disadvantage. She's chained up,
Mhm.
and he is literally the one who is deciding her fate at this particular moment. I mean, Dorian ultimately and the king, but right now, he's the one that's there,
Yeah.
and people who are used to getting their way don't
Mhm.
like it when they don't. And he holds all the cards, he holds all the power, and I think she is just unhappy about that. She needs something.
Mhm.
Even if it just pisses him off a little bit, that's a win because it
Yeah.
means that she got under his skin
Mhm.
and she's not getting it. And there might be a little bit of pride in there too. Like, I am the best assassin. And did you hear me? I'm the best assassin. And he's just going like, oh, yeah, okay. Like
Yeah, that would irk me. I'd be like, "No, you don't understand. I am the best. Ask me about it. Come on."
he's literally like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like,
During all of that, she starts to ask him about his relationship with Prince Dorian and if Kale himself holds any titles, Lord, Duke, whatever. And again, there's a lack of response from Kale. Do you think he's hiding something or do you think he just doesn't want to share with the criminal?
yeah, I don't think at this point he's actively trying to hide anything from her. I think he's disinterested and he's trying to remain disinterested because the minute he invests in her
Mhm.
and she becomes a person, then she's no longer just an assassin. And she's no longer just a contestant for the champion. And now it's somebody he knows. And you know, from there, it's really hard to disconnect from that personal, however, that personal connection starts. It's really hard to disconnect from that. And
Yeah.
I think it literally is, he is just trying to keep that away. Like,
Yeah.
that's how
Mm.
I.
So, moving on to chapter 5, as the group travels through the countryside, Selena begins to experience life outside of the mines again. She observes the natural beauty of the landscape, including the legendary Oakwald Forest, which is steeped in ancient magic. Selena's connection to the forest and its legends of fairies hints at her deeper knowledge of world's magic, which has been suppressed under Adarlan's rule. During the journey, her interactions with Kaol reveal a growing tension between them. While Selena tries to provoke him with her wit, Kaol remains distant and focused on his duty, though his actions might suggest he might harbor some sympathy for her situation. So, in this chapter, we're beginning to see, or we're seeing more of Selena's. There's a little cameo from Willow again for our YouTubers. Selena begins to feel the isolation of her past creeping in, particularly when observing the guards and the prisoners left behind. How does this sense of being an outsider affect her interactions with others, including Kale and Dorian?
I think you know, being an assassin is gonna be a lonely life, right?
Hmm.
Like, no matter how you look at it. And then, of course, being captured, going to the mines, more isolation. It's she's looking for a way to connect with the other people, I think, even though she probably doesn't really understand yet to to the degree of what it is that she wants.
Hmm.
She just she just needs something. And, there's I think a bit of it's not regret, but it's, she left all those people behind,
Hmm.
and how is that fair? That she's the one that got plucked out and,
And leaving all the other slaves there.
yeah. And I mean, they
Yeah.
were people that she cared for that, she helped, she describes how she helped some of them with the infections that would kill them within a day or so, and she would clean them. And but then she talks about how, one day somebody's there, the next day somebody's not there because they got crushed in a rock slide or they got whipped too many times, or, so she's
Hmm.
dealing with a lot of it within the span of a day. Her whole world has been turned upside down again. So I think it's to go from an isolation. Actually, there's a number of different kinds of isolations, I think, at this point. The isolation of being an assassin, of not being able to really connect with anybody because of the kind of stuff that she has to do.
Hmm.
And she has the isolation of being captured and being in the mines.
Hmm.
And now she's free ish, but she's still in isolation because the people around her don't view her as a person. She's just, to Dorian, she's just a tool to, you know, whatever. We don't, she doesn't know what his ultimate goal is at this point. You kind of get the idea that, yeah, she's just a weapon for the prince now. Kale's right there, but he couldn't give two shits about, anything that she finds interesting. He's basically like, don't cause me trouble. Let's go. Like,
Hmm.
the sooner I can transport you,
The better.
the better. And don't make my job harder, please. Like,
Yeah.
so this girl's not getting a break.
Yeah.
Like, she's gone to all these things, and she's still ultimately alone
Hmm.
because nobody cares about Celaena the person.
Yeah.
She's an assassin. She's the assassin. And that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I think going with that in the isolation, the group makes camp, the soldiers, Dorian, the Duke, Kale, Selena, they make camp and she overhears um the guards, the soldiers talking about Oakland Forest and how much the soldiers want this forest burnt down too. The king of Outerland burnt much of the world down during his conquest. And in Oakland Forest, there were a lot of fae and fairies that were killed or driven from their home during this king's war. And the soldiers, they follow their leader. They want this to be gone as well. And she steps in and she was like, "No, this is Brandon's forest. King Brandon was a fae. This was the fae forest. This forest had the gnomes and the nymphs and the sprites, etc. And those were all ruled by the immortal fae." So I think even just amongst sitting there listening to everybody talking, she is still feeling that isolation. Like, even if she wanted to try and fit in and talk, the soldiers are like, "No, this forest needs to be burned
Mhm.
down. These creatures need to be further driven out and everything." I think that said, like, you know?
Yeah, she still can't connect to the people that she's sitting there with because ultimately, they want and believe things very different than she does. She just, what is there to connect? You know, she can't connect with them. And so, you know,
Yeah.
even though
I
they're
think this is
guards, like she don't care, but
yeah. Uh, so we find out a little bit more about her history. We find out that Arobin Hamel, he was the king of assassins, and he found her when she was 8 and she was orphaned. Her original home was Terrasen, and Arobin is a fucking asshole and would have handed her over to the king if she hadn't agreed to become his apprentice, sort of thing. That's the only like little bit of snippet that we get more. Like, so each chapter we're getting a little bit more and more of her history. But do you think, how does this complicated relationship with her mentor shape her view of loyalty and power?
I mean, she was very loyal to, the assassins and the assassin guild.
Mm,
But, at this point, you're not really sure if it's because she had no other options or, if she truly felt that way. I didn't ever really get the sense that she ever looked at him as like a father figure at all. She always does actually throughout the other parts, kind of seems to think about him with disdain. Like,
mm,
yeah, he trained me and yeah, I became a great assassin, but it didn't really do me any favors. Like the life was still hard, right? Like
mhm.
if she didn't do a good job, she got punished. So it
Some would
was,
say that would be tough love
y-
if you subscribe to that.
well, yeah, I don't think he was doing it out of, he was trying to create a weapon
Mm,
and he did a really good job. I think it's kind of key to her character is nobody really understands her mental fortitude.
mhm,
And she has lost parts of herself, but for the most part, she has kept true to herself. She recognizes things for what they are. And even though she is an assassin, you get the idea that she is not just a cold blooded killer.
mhm.
Like she still has values and things that she looks at and says, that's not that's not right. I may be
Right.
a killer and an assassin, but
Mm,
that shit right there, that ain't right. So I think she understands loyalty
mhm,
and I think she will be loyal as long as you give her a reason for her to stay loyal.
yeah,
Like it's not an unconditional, you know, kind of blind loyalty.
yeah. You have to show her why, give her
Yeah.
reasons why. Stay loyal, respect. It works the same way. Um, so we find out also during the King's War, King of Adarlan outlawed magic, fae, fairies, said it was an affront to the goddess and her gods. Within a month, magic also disappeared. They went around burning books. And doesn't this sound familiar to our political state today? Storefronts, sacred places destroyed, magic users, seers, healers, they were all burned or became prisoners in Endovier. We also learned a little bit that Celaena also had gifts and memory of her abilities haunted her dreams, but we don't know what her gifts were. Do you have any theories when you were first reading up to this
I
point?
mean, I kind of basically figured that somehow she was connected to the Fey world at this point because of her concern for the forest and
Mhm.
just her sort of general knowledge about the things that should have been there.
Mhm.
I wasn't sure what it was gonna be, but there was definitely I did feel that she had some Fae connection. And I was just waiting to see what it was, basically. Like,
Yeah.
and I guess, I mean, if you were a young child, at 8 or whatever, and then you were taken and put into some completely different situation and then never really given a chance to think about or explore, you're going to forget how to do stuff like that or forget that it's really even there.
Mhm.
It's like learning to play piano. You can be great at it. You don't do it for 5 or 6 years, you know, you forget how to do some of it. You don't do it for 10 or 15 years. Well, you're going to be hard pressed to even maybe remember what you even did.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just kind of a loose example, but
Well, I mean, yeah, there is a point too where if the ability is also taken away from you,
well, yeah, I
you
mean, if magic is removed and it was a magical ability,
mm,
then you wouldn't even remember what it was. I mean,
or how to do it or
maybe you just knew that you were magical, but you never actually knew the potential of that magic. And then
mm,
all of a sudden you just knew that it was gone one day. And
mhm.
you're like, well, that sucks. I didn't even get to find out what it was,
Yeah.
you know?
So, like we said, they had made camp for the night, and Selena is given her own tent when they stop to camp, but she is shackled to a guard posted outside her tent. I find this hilarious considering that she killed 24 people at the salt mines. And yes, she has been shackled more or less to Kale during their travels. But if she really wanted, one guard is like that's really not enough. I find it funny that they pointed this out, but like you would think that Kale would be like, "No, we need guards all over her tent. If she moves, I want to know." And instead they're like, "No, just shackle her to one guard. They'll be fine." If she decides to escape, it'll be fine. I don't know.
Yeah, the thinking behind that is because you don't get the idea that Kale is stupid to be
Mhm.
like, yeah, just you'll be fine. And the guard that she's shackled to, he's probably sitting there like, is not fine. Like,
Right?
yeah,
Like, I get that her life is also on the line, like, if she were to try and flee, they will hunt her down. So her one ticket out of all of this is to fight to become the champion and serve her time as the champion. It was just like, "We're just gonna shackle you to this one random guard that's staying up this night, and good luck to
yeah.
you."
I mean, well, maybe they also considered like she's full of herself and she thinks that she can do a lot right now,
Mhm.
but she is probably overestimating her. Well, I mean, actually, she kind of is, which you see later in the books. She wouldn't have made it very far if she tried to run. Like,
Yeah.
physically, she can't do it. I think she thinks she can,
Mhm.
but realistically, she wouldn't make it very far. They would catch her. And to her, yeah, is it worth it to risk trying to escape and maybe making it or trying to escape and them going, you're not worth this trouble? Like,
Yeah. Getting shot down. Yeah.
and despite everything that she's been through, she's hopeful.
Yeah.
She is hopeful that this is going to be a legit way for her to gain her freedom. She doesn't understand the full impact and full ramification yet of what she's agreed to, but it is a possibility. And that's what you see through her character is despite everything, she remains hopeful
Mhm.
about her future and the future in general, which
Yeah.
in of itself is amazing because most people at this point would be like, I don't care. Like, just kill me at this point because I'm just done. Like,
Yeah.
most people ain't gonna have that much fight left in them. Like, and she's a fighter. Like,
She is through and through. So I just wanted to make note of this before we move on to the next chapter. So you had mentioned that you thought that she had some connection to the Fae, with the brief mention that she had some gift when she was younger. So when she wakes in the morning, she sees small white flowers laid at the foot of her cot, with infant sized footprints going in and out of her tent. And she quickly, sweeps any traces away. She hides the flowers in a satchel, and she's like on guard the whole morning. No one mentions anything about fairies or the flowers or the footprints, but she's just like on guard about it the whole rest of the day. Palms sweaty, heart racing, and she's keeping an eye out on the woods as they travel. Um, did this solidify your your thinking that she has some connection to the Fae? Do you think it was something else?
Yeah, I pretty much figured, that the Fae were at least interested in her to some degree.
Mm,
And then I was expecting something to
a
happen.
jailbreak?
Not a jailbreak, just I honestly I was expecting for her to see something, like in
Mm,
the forest,
yeah.
but she never did.
Mhm.
Like it literally that's it. Footprints, flowers, and then
And then
they
nothing.
get to the castle and that's
No
it.
mention.
There's
Yeah.
nothing. She never saw anything else about it, you know? So you just like, was it just some thing that wandered in and was like, "Oh, hey, like, I'm attracted to this person because of something, fey energy you know,
Or something.
or something," and then that's it. Like, yeah, I was actually really surprised that they got all the way to when we through the next chapter that there was just nothing in the forest. She never saw anything. She never heard anything. She just
They continued on their trek and there was
yeah,
nothing.
like, I don't know. It was kinda to me, it was a little odd to, like, mention it, and
Thing.
then nothing came of it, which, you know, I guess kinda makes sense if, they don't wanna be seen,
Mm.
but you get the impression that all the magical creatures are gone because there's no magic, so I don't yeah. I don't know.
And
It was just it was a little weird for me, that part, because I just was like, "Okay." I mean
yeah, I remember reading it the first time and thinking, "Okay, so there is something there. What are we getting next?" And we didn't get anything yet.
yeah.
So,
So so, yeah. It was a kind of a weird way to end the chapter, but, that's okay. Okay, so after 2 weeks of travel, the party nears Rifthold, the capital of Adarlan, and the glass castle where the competition takes place is there. The journey has been arduous with harsh weather conditions, but Selena remains resolute. As they approach the glass castle, Selena reflects on her past and the betrayal that led to her capture. The sheer size and grandeur of the glass castle stirs up memories of her former life, and she steels herself for what lies ahead. This chapter serves as a bridge between her life as a prisoner and the new challenges awaiting her in the competition. So there was a lot of focus put on the journey, right?
mhm,
Because it took them a while to get to the castle.
mhm,
And it talked very much about her discomfort as they were going through, how she had wet shoes and she was cold and just generally uncomfortable. Got her really thinking about, when she had the good life. And even at some point, I think she was, this traveling conditions compared to even being in the mines, this sucks. Like,
mhm.
I didn't have to sleep in the rain. Like, I didn't have
Yeah.
wet clothes and wet shoes. And so, when you were reading that, like, you know, do you think that they were, because, none of them were comfortable. Like, Kale wasn't comfortable. The guards weren't comfortable. But, like, do you think that there could have been an easier way for them to do this? Like, did they have to make it miserable for her? Or is it just one of those things where it's like, we're soldiers, we're used to this, and she can fend for herself? Like, again, not really caring about her conditions because she's a great assassin. Like, she can figure it
Yeah.
out. She'll be fine. Like,
Or at least, like the guards and Kale. they have this mindset that she is still a prisoner, she is still a criminal. Criminals don't get the comforts of anything. I think they were like, "You're lucky you get nice clothes, you're lucky that you get your own tent, you're lucky that you get your own mount," you know? Everything else, "Suck it up, buttercup," sort
Yeah.
of thing. I think the only people that they're going to be worried about comfort is the Crown Prince Dorian and Duke Parrington because they are the nobles,
Yeah.
and everybody else is basically a peon. I also find it like Kale had threatened Celaena before in one of the chapters, like, basically, if you don't shut up, I could throw you into one of the wagons, and then you'll be stuck riding inside of a wagon on this journey. So I think if she was truly miserable or, I mean, she was miserable, but I think if she had caused enough ruckus, she could have traveled in a wagon. It probably would have sucked, but at least she would have been dry. But there was that feeling of being trapped again. Like if you were trapped in a mine for a year, you wouldn't want to be trapped in a wagon
Yeah.
either. At least I wouldn't. Like I would rather be soaking wet, but outside where I would get the sense of freedom versus being, you know, cornered in a wagon. I think that everybody still has this mindset of she's a criminal. Her wants, needs, and desires still don't matter at this point. She is not a person at this point.
Yeah. I mean, fair. She's just an
Mm,
assassin, you
yeah,
know? It's that personal connection. She's not a person. She's just an assassin or just a
yeah,
criminal or, it's taking the humanity out of the person so that you don't feel quite so bad when they're struggling and suffering and um
yeah.
so she had 2 weeks of that, right? It was about
Mhm,
2 weeks of the travel, and they finally get to the castle. They describe the castle, right, as gargantuan, a vertical city of shimmering crystalline towers and bridges, reflects the light and all this stuff, and it's very grandiose, and she hates it.
mhm.
Like, immediately, she's like, "What the shit is
Yeah.
this?" Like
Yeah,
like, I feel like I don't think that I personally would have that same reaction because, like, I like castles, and, granted, I didn't spend a year in a mine, but her reaction in this is really just funny to me because she does get to just this obscenely large, beautiful castle estate. Her first reaction is, "I hate it." Like,
it's tasteless. I think she says, like, "The castle is tasteless, a waste of resources and talent," and I love that Prince Dorian is even like, "One more glass tower and the whole thing will collapse." Like, he himself is also not a fan of this,
right, and he lives there. Like,
and yeah, and he lives there. Like, when I first read this and this might be, like, a California only sort of thing, but it reminded me of, like, the Crystal Cathedral. I don't know if your school ever took you to field trips
uh,
to the Crystal Cathedral. So that's what I was, like, trying to envision, but at the same time, like, they're talking about this whole thing is made out of glass, and I'm trying to picture this, and I'm usually very inventive and stuff, and, my mind just goes into all sorts of details about everything, and I can't picture a fully glass castle. I'm like, "Can you see into the bedrooms? If you're on the outside, can you see, like, people doing stuff that should be behind closed doors?"
yeah, I didn't I wasn't getting it very well either because they describe going into areas, that they clearly can't see into. So is it I don't know. I may have to reread it to see because a purely glass castle, yeah, you would be able to see through some, levels of it. Or
Yeah.
is it glass, but it's opaque glass, so the
Mhm.
walls appear solid,
Mhm.
like frosted glass. But then it does describe that there is stone, because
It's built on top of the original stone castle. So you have, like, this big stone castle, and then on top of it, you have this big, grandiose glass castle, and
yeah, so it must be not translucent glass. Like,
mm. All I could think about too is, like, if it's, like, a really sunny day, like summer, is it going through and reflecting prisms everywhere? Does it, like, act as a magnifier and, like, catch
well,
fires on the landscape?
I
You know,
mean,
like
yeah, those are important questions. Does that ever happen? Inquiring minds want to know.
exactly. I will say if you haven't, search, like, do Google search, do TikTok search, but, like, look up artists who have, like, drawn, painted, glass castles. They have done phenomenal jobs, stuff that my mind just couldn't wrap around, but I still, like, I'm very, like, how does this work architecturally? Like, did you have a lot of glass blowers sitting there, like, trying to form this glass castle? And
That yeah.
I know, uh, weird things to focus on while we're reading. So Selena and Dorian do get into a conversation, and she discusses her suspicions about her betrayal that led to her capture and her time in Endovier. It's clear that she's still grappling with the events that led to her capture. How do you think her trust or her lack of it will influence her relationships with, Kaol and Dorian, like, moving forward?
I mean, at this point, there is no trust at this point, and there's no basis for trust at this point, other than the fact that neither one of them has killed her, and I think she takes that as a kind of like well, they're tolerating me, so I could be a little mouthy, and I could be a little the prince is not very reactionary like a lot of, royal people would be. Like, you say one wrong thing and they're like, yeah, okay, off with the head. Like, he kind of engages her a little bit.
Mm,
She enjoys, but at this point, I still, there's no basis for trust yet. And as far as she's concerned, there never will be.
mhm,
I don't think she plans to trust anybody. She's in this for herself. She's going to do her thing, do the agreement, and,
mhm.
and get out. And you know, she'll be 22, 23 by the time she's done with her service of the king, right? 4 years, if it's, true.
Yeah, like 22, 23.
So that's, her focus is, I don't have time for, like, on one hand, she's like, she wants to engage with people, but on the other
Mhm,
hand, she's like, I don't have time for this. I need to focus on this, and I will deal with you,
mhm,
but we are not going to be, it's like, I'll deal with you, but we're not friends. And
mhm.
you have then like Kale who's like, yeah, I know. We're not friends.
Yeah,
I'm here to watch you and train you. And that's basically it. Don't screw it up. Like,
yeah.
you know, but
I feel like oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because she is hopeful, which we've seen her character be hopeful even in these early chapters. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that her character wants to have somebody to trust, even though she constantly says otherwise. I think she wants that. She wants somebody to have her back, which we learn about, in her past and,
Yeah.
and the person that she, people she was close to. She wants somebody to be there, but
Mm,
can she get there is kind of the
mhm.
question. Like,
Yeah.
plus she doesn't know these people. She's known them for what, 2 weeks. They pulled her out of a pit
Yeah.
and then made her, travel for 2 weeks through crappy weather. Like, these are not friendly people at this point. Like,
Yeah. She does open up to Kale about her time in Dovier. They cut her hair, gave her rags, put a pickaxe in her hand as if she knew what to do with it. Change her to the others. She endured her whippings. the overseers rubbed salt into her open wounds. The salt that she mind you, they rubbed into her open wounds. They whipped her often enough that the gashes never really closed. And it was the prisoners from Elway that stayed up with her and helped her clean her wounds so that they didn't become infected. And after relaying all of this to Kale, he doesn't say anything further to her until the next day.
And that was something I didn't understand about that was they were told not to kill her, right?
Mhm. Correct.
But they did this knowing
Mhm.
full well
She could
that the
die.
infections could kill her.
Yeah.
And so what was the plan? Like, oh, she got an infection and she died. It wasn't our fault. Like, again,
Maybe.
these guards, they're not the smart at like they think they're pulling this great like, oh,
Mhm.
we can't whip her to death and we can't like stab her to death, but maybe we can infection her to death. Like, you
But
know,
I mean, does salt work as a purifier? I know it'd be irritating and burn as hell, being rubbed into an open wound and doing that over and over, but that's it. Like, ceremonially, I know salt is a purifier, salt circle, salt outside of the house, but does it for your body, does it also work as a purifier or
I
is it just an irritant?
I don't know actually. Would rubbing salt into your wounds help keep them from getting infected, or would it cause you more damage? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. It's just something that popped in my head.
So,
Um,
so maybe maybe you're right, and maybe that wasn't. So maybe that was their way of knowing that they could torture her as much as they wanted without it killing her, because the
hmm.
salt would be a cleanser of sorts. Maybe that could be.
Like, I can see, sleeping on the hard, dirty floor, not being able to bathe, that sort of thing. That's how wounds get infected. Plus, the dust from the mines and everything. You're reopening the wounds. But yeah, I don't know what the benefits or non benefits of salt would be. That would be a great thing to look up. But I just found okay, so I'm an introvert and I'm socially awkward at times. So I kind of like felt for Kale, like he just learned this horrific thing, things that she went through, and he doesn't say anything further to her until the next day. Like, what do you say to a person that opened up to you and said, yeah, this is all the shit I went through? Of course, it was horrible. But also at the same time, like, what could you say to a person that's been through all of that other than, like, I'm sorry? Yeah, I know. Part of me kind of wish that he would have said something to her at that point after she opened up, but I also get not having something to say either. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what would you even say at that point? Oh, that sucks. Okay, good night.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes it kind of worse than not saying anything at all.
Man, sucks to be you. Good night.
Well, that's
All right, I don't know. Like, I would like to think he literally just didn't know what to say, and he was just like, anything I say at this point is just gonna make it worse.
yeah.
All right, later. Um, on a side note, I looked it up, and apparently, salt draws water out of bacterial cells. So rubbing salt into a wound will keep it from getting infected.
We'll see.
So
We learned something
literally,
new.
so it was literally advanced torture, because if they were whipping her and keeping her wounds open and
Mhm.
then putting the salt on so that they wouldn't get infected, that hurts like hell
Yeah.
because salt burns on open wounds,
Yeah.
but it was keeping it from getting infected. And then they were whipping it and reopening the wounds and just doing it over and over. Imagine going through that over and over for a year.
Ugh.
At that point, you're probably hoping for death, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to get it because they've become very creative in their way of torture.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
On the Oh my god. Well, that leads us to the final part, at least for me, of this chapter is Celaena has nightmares about Endovier, and who wouldn't, right? And these offer a window into her trauma. She woke up from this nightmare that she was in one of the mass graves at Endovier. They didn't have separate burials for each slave that
Mm-mm.
died. They just tossed them all into a mass grave, and she dreamt that she was in that mass grave trying to claw her way out. That's hella traumatic. Like, besides the whippings, besides, no sunlight, no companionship, malnourishment, everything, like, oh, PTSD for years.
Yeah. I mean, and we do see that throughout the story of her dealing with this recurring theme of betrayal and nightmares and just her managing those feelings and also trying to ignore them too,
Mm.
largely. Like any good millennial, she's like, feelings? What? I don't have those. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it gives a good glimpse into her character that as strong as she is, she's still a human. Like,
Mhm.
she's gonna be fighting these things for a while,
Yeah.
as she comes to terms with leaving one crappy situation and finding herself into a new, kind of better,
Mhm.
but still crappy situation. Like,
Yeah.
it is
Dude.
better. I think it is better. Anything's better than the mines.
Yeah, I mean, at least now she has some freedom, even if she is heavily watched and heavily guarded, at least she has a chance to earn her freedom. She's not shackled, she's not having to work in the salt mines.
Yeah.
She's gonna get regular meals now. So it is a step up, I would say.
Yeah. So at this point, there's the first 6 chapters of the book, right? At this point, had you made any, like, precursor guesses on the characters? Like, not counting Selena because she is the lead, right?
Mhm.
So, we know that we're going through this journey with her.
Mm.
But in terms of, like, Dorian or Kale, were you leaning one way or the other in terms of, like, did you think that one of them was gonna be more of a good guy, more of a bad guy, more of a neutral? He's in it for himself. Initially I was like, oh, Kale he comes in and he's a dick, like, but by the end of chapter 6, I didn't feel that way anymore.
Mm.
I felt he was dickish
Mhm.
because he's still being very standoffish, but at the same time, he has to. Like,
Yeah.
he's a guard, she's an assassin.
Mhm.
He's not there to make friends,
Yeah.
and at this point, still was very much on the fence about Dorian. I couldn't make any sort of judgment call on if I thought he was gonna be, like, a standard, like, douchebag prince or, is he playing a bigger game or, like, very much on the fence.
Yeah, I was also pretty much on the fence about Prince Dorian because we have some interactions with him and Selena leading up to this point. But during the travels, he rode ahead with Duke Parrington. So we didn't get as much interaction between him and Selena. We got more of the interaction between Kaol and Selena. And still up to this point, I was still thinking this Kale guy is such a douche. Like, there's more to Selena's story. Yes, she was an assassin. Yes, something happened. I understand that he views her as a criminal, but like, my God, dude, get that stick up your get that stick out of your ass. But I think it was also written in a way that you're feeling sympathetic towards Selena, and we're not
Mhm.
seeing Kale's point of view of it. You have to remember that he is the captain of the guard. He has to be on guard. He has to protect the prince. So, yes, he has his reasons for maintaining his distance, but at this point, like, I was still trying to figure out whether I liked either the prince or Kale.
Yeah.
Dick Parrington, right off the bat, hated him. Like,
Yeah. I same. I immediately from his interaction in the beginning, I tagged him as a bad guy.
yeah. And I think he is written that way on purpose, even though they don't get much interaction, other than when he threw her to the ground and everything. He was certainly made to read that way.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah. So do you have any favorite moments, quotes, or theories, from the first 6 chapters?
The first 6 chapters, I hadn't really worked out any theories yet. There's not really enough information to go on yet. I think
Mm,
when I got farther, the next batch, that was when I start working out like, "Oh, maybe this or maybe that," or
mhm.
but at this point, no, I hadn't really figured out any real ideas where the story was going.
Okay.
Ye
Yeah.
It's still very much, introductory, like, these are the characters, is very much the setup, like,
Mhm.
but it was enough, like, to keep me hooked and, wanting to see where it was going for sure,
Mm,
because
yeah.
the setup is good, and it did get me interested in the characters and the
Mhm.
competition, curious about, where all that's going, and
How it's gonna play out.
yeah.
I think my favorite quote in these chapters is Selena's mantra, her "I will not be afraid." It just those five words, they're powerful, and like you said, they are a mantra. It's something that she can tell herself over and over to help her deal with these hard and scary situations that she's been in and that she is now confronting. I also love that Selena is thinking of how she could get free or take on someone, like, through all of these chapters. Like, every single chapter, she's like, "And this is how I would take this person out, and this is
Mhm.
how I would attempt to get free." Her mind is just constantly working, and I feel like even though she was a slave for a year, her skills and her mindset have not slipped. She's always looking for the advantage in each situation that she is in. I think that harkens back to her training all those years, but it also feels like a trauma response too.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
for sure. I just imagine her, like, going up to, like, everybody, each person is kinda walking up and being like, "I could take you." Like, and just having the other person sitting there like,
"What?
"What?"
What you talking about?"
And just her walking away, like,
I imagine her, like, looking you up and down, like, the slow, like, and be like, "And these are your weak points." And then just that's it. Just she could just eye you and know, like,
mhm,
where to target you.
and you're just sitting there like, "That wasn't very nice." Like,
Right. Kill to have those skills, though. My goodness.
yeah, right.
Uh, just for fun, since you are such a coffee guy and you love making the coffees and everything, how do you think Selena, Kale, and Dorian would take their coffee?
I get back and forth on I definitely think that Dorian is a food coffee guy
Mm.
like me. I like my "K child, you're."
Sorry, everyone. The shakiness is our cat Willow.
She's cleaning herself right off camera over here. Okay, now she's laying down. I feel like Dorian is the guy who, like, he would take a pour over with just some creamer in it if
Mhm.
that's what you gave him. But if you gave him the option, he would love the espresso with the handmade syrup and the frothed up, milk
Cold foam and
and the cold foam and the
chocolate chip.
drizzle and like but he would never admit it,
Mm.
but that would be his drink and he would love it. But see, I also kind of feel that way about Kale too. Like, I feel like he's the kind of person who's like, "Oh, yeah, I just drink my coffee, just give it to me
Black.
black," when he's in front of But,
Everybody.
like, if he's in his own quarters, he's like, "Creamer and that," like
I don't know, like, I feel the same way about Kale, like, he says in front of everybody he takes it dark, no sugar, no creamer, but when he's by himself, it's not so much a full coffee, but he does dunk, like, all
yeah,
the
that's
sugar
what's like, it's
and
black in
maybe
front
not
of everybody, but when he's in his room, it's more of that milky, like
I take my creamer with a shot of coffee, sort of.
yeah. And Celaena, I don't know if she would even really be a coffee drinker.
See, I peg her as a PSL girl through and through. Like, I feel like PSL would just be right up her alley.
I mean, I guess if it yeah, if it was like a major food drink,
Mm.
maybe. Yeah, but definitely not a standard, like, pot of pot coffee, drip coffee, or even, like, an espresso. I don't think she would be down for those things, like
I peg her for a big hot chocolate girl,
mm,
like the
mhm.
decadent hot chocolates, like the kind you see on TikTok of, like, in France or even,
Or with, like, the chocolate bar on top and, like
uh-huh, or Edinburgh where they have the specialty hot chocolate shops and it's, like, marshmallows and whipped cream and chocolate shavings. I feel like that would be her jam.
I could see that. That could make sense. So, on that note, that was the first 6 chapters of Third Glass, and you guys, you let us know if you like this format. I think we went close to 2 hours, so let us know if that's good. Did we maintain your interest? Should we be a little more concise with our chapters? I'll try to ramble less. Sorry. Sickness. What can I say?
We just really love our books. What can we say?
Yeah, well, and tangents. I go off on tangents, but let us know. I don't think all of these are going to be this long. We're still feeling out, our format, seeing how this is going to work. And yeah, so it's at the end of the episode. We once again want to just give a shout out to our friend who runs K911 Rescue. They're a rescue that's devoted to dogs and cats that no one wants. The broken, defective, and depressed. They focus on senior, homeless, handicapped, all the fur babies that get overlooked. Chris and Sabrina work really hard to get to the shelters and rescue as much as they can. And yeah, they are great people, and they're always looking, for help to try and get as many of them out as possible. But they need help with fosters and donations and just all the stuff that comes with running a rescue, a nonprofit rescue. They do all of this from the money that they make, with their regular jobs. This is not their regular job. They do this
On the side.
on top of having regular jobs. They both work full time. So you can visit K911rescue.com at K9. Well, I'm going to put it on the screen, so I don't need to spell it.
We will go into chapters 7 through 13. So hopefully you guys will tune in again as we summarize and talk about our favorite moments and deep dives into chapters 7 through 13. Please remember to like and rate this podcast, leave comments, and share with your friends and loved ones. Make sure to follow us on our social medias. We will be sharing our chaotic madness with our fur babies, our current reads, and more. Until then, happy reading, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.
Bye.
See you later.